here in Design View. Really simple, not going to win any awards for design here, but I've got a text box where you can enter some data and click on the Submit button, and in code I'm using good old-fashioned response redirect to redirect them to a page that I'm going to use to read what was entered in the text box. And the technique I'm using to pass the data from this page to the receiving page is I'm using just the URL string. I'm appending the text property of the text box onto the URL string. And on the receiving page, if we look at the code, I'm using the request objects parameters based on the key name that I gave it, and I'm just adding that to the label. Really simple. So if I run this, bring my browser into screen here, type some text in my text box, click on my Submit button, you can see that I'm able to read it back on the receiving page. So far so good, not a problem here. The problem that you'd face, and it's more of just a logistics issue, is if I had a page, say the data entry form, where I've got dozens or even 10 data fields, my URL string is going to get kind of complicated, and the fact that the URL string is shown to the user, it just gets a little bit messy. We could use various state management techniques, we could use cookies, we could use session state, but there's an alternative to all that which doesn't require any state management, but we can still get that look and feel of, say, a data entry page and some type of feedback response page, and that's where the multi-view control comes in. So what I'm going to do is add a new page to my folder, just a web form page, and I'll call this one multi-view demo. Switch over to Design View, add a little heading to this. Alright, and then what I'm going to add is from my toolbox, I'm going to add this multi-view control. It shows up right here. If I double click it, that'll add it to my form. Now what's going to make this multi-view work is it's kind of a parent container, and what I'm going to put inside of the multi-view are one or more view instances. So I'm just going to double click on this view from my toolbox twice, so I'll get 2 views, and each one of these views I can design here in my designer window. Let's do this in source view. Just call this view 1, and then we'll copy this, paste this down into this one. We'll call this view 2. Alright, so far so good. Let's add some more into here. We'll add some label, enter something, add a text box control to this. And on my view 2, I'm just going to add a little text here, data you entered is, and I'll add a label control, which I'll use to read back what is in the text box. Change a few properties here in source view. Just call this text box txt something. Call my label here LBL output. We're going to use code to set the text, so I'm going to remove the text attribute completely. And finally, one more thing, I didn't want a button control, so let me add a, oops, that's not what I wanted. And we'll just put it right here off the toolbox. And the button control I'm going to use as my navigation to go from my first view to my second view. I'll just call it btn submit. Give it a text of submit. And if we look at it in design view, this is kind of what it looks like. Again, nothing fancy at all. Now right now, if I view this in my browser, you're not going to see any of the views. All you'll see is the heading we put on the page. So to get the multi-view to work, we have to tell the multi-view control, kind of like the parent, the traffic cop here. We've got to tell it which view we want to start with. And we can either do this in design or source. I think I'll use source view. So I go up to this multi-view control, and the way I tell it which view I want to initially start with is I set this active view index attribute. And it's based on index numbers, and so the first view is going to have index number 0. So I'll put that as my first view, and if I wanted the second view, I'd give it a 1. If I view this in my browser, we can see that I can actually see the stuff that I entered into the first view. Right now it doesn't do anything. We haven't written any code for our submit button, so we're going to do that next. I'll do this from design view, take advantage of a little double click trick, set up my event handler. And here's where the beauty comes in. I can treat this as a single page because it really is a single page, but to the user it's going to look like two different pages, but I have access to all the controls in both views. So I want to write to the control that's in the second view. Control I named LBL output. I'm going to write to its text property, and I'm going to be reading that from the text box which was in view 1. So txt something text. So there's no need to add anything, any kind of view state, cookies, parameters. I'm simply reading from one control and writing directly into a second control. But like I said, when you're viewing this in the browser, it looks like you're going to two different pages. So I can enter something in here, click on submit. Oops, we did forget to change the view though. So one thing I need to switch, go back to my code. I set my code in my text, but what I forgot to do was actually change the view. I need to set the same property or attribute that I set here on my multi-view 1. Again, that's the parent container. I set the active view index here in source code. That's the default, but I need to change that active view index in code. So below this line or above, doesn't really matter. I'm going to set the multi-view 1, that's just the default name. I'm going to set its active view index equal to 1. Now let's try this again. Click on submit. As you can see, I'm taken to the second view, and it looks like to the browser I've gone to a different page. I can even hit the back button, forward button, so the browser is able to track this with the back and forward button. And whatever I put into these views, let's actually look at it in design view. So whatever I put into these panels is going to be what's is displayed. So the multi-view will only show one view at a time. So whatever I want to show in a particular view, again, I put inside a view container. Now, as you can see from the header, it appeared in both views. So anything that I put outside of the multi-view container will always appear in all the views that you put into it. So that's a real simple demonstration of how to use a multi-view control